Welcome to Major Antonio's presentation of The Last Days of Fort Vaux, March 9th to June 7th, 1916, by Henry Bordeaux. Preface.
Verdun. Those two syllables that have already become historic ring out today like the brazen tones of a trumpet. In France, no one can hear them without a thrill of pride. In England, in America, if any speaker utters them, the whole audience rises as one man. Of the battle, of the victory of Verdun, here is a single episode, that of Fort Vaux, beleaguered for 3 months and lost for a brief space on June 7th. Its defense takes us back past centuries emblazoned with military renown and recalls our heroic poems of the Middle Ages. It is a song of Roland, in which the protagonist, unseen yet ever present, is the honor of France. Even as Roland, blowing his horn, recounted from afar the drama of Roncesvalles to Charlemagne as he went back across the mountains, so the fort, up to the last moment, kept the supreme command informed of its life and its death throes by means of signals and carrier pigeons. I was able to realize the wounds it had suffered, and its powers of resistance, in the month of March, before the final conflicts of the early days of June. I examined its defenders at almost every shift. I heard its appeals for help and its last words. Hence I have sought to set down the records of its glory. In spite of my studious efforts, which chance has favored, I have been unable to collect all these records. Moreover, they lack that essential element which is the secret of the supreme command, and without which one can present merely a pale shadow of history, not history itself. The war through which we are living is like the endless roll of the sea. We catch the rhythm, but we cannot count the waves. I crave forgiveness from all those forgotten heroes whose deeds I have been unable to rescue from the night of oblivion. I have had the opportunity of following the various phases of the Verdun battle. I have snatched every spare moment, and they were none too many, to put together these fragmentary notes, which I have received sanction to publish. How can we resist the demon who drives us to write when such a theme lies ready to our hand? In the ordinary course of things, I should have needed more time for doing it justice. But today, time is doled out to each of us in scanty measure. In point of fact, no episode of this war can be regarded as standing apart from the rest. A close brotherhood in arms links the warriors of Verdun with those of the Bukovina, of Galicia, of the Trentino, and of the Somme. What happened at Vaux was not a matter of indifference to any of the belligerents, or even to any nation on earth. Whenever we speak of the victory of the Marne, our hearts swell with joy, and a hymn of deliverance rises inevitably to our lips. The departures for Champagne and the Somme have all the blitheness of a summer morning. The beauty of Verdun is more grim and austere. It is a struggle of patience and sacrifice, one in which the watchword is hold and keep. The question here is not merely one of barring the road to a foe who may pierce our line, but also of pinning him down to the spot while the Allies draw up and carry out their plan of a general offensive. That is why the resistance of Fort Vaux serves a higher purpose than the defense of a mere scrap of territory. It is bound up with a victory. It forms part of a victory, if victory be measured by the thwarting of the enemy's will and design. There is beauty in that victory, a beauty born of necessity and endurance. May a reflection of it illumine the epic of Fort Vaux.
Book 1. 1. The Fort.
In the great squadron of forts which shield Verdun from a distance, like a fleet marshaled on the open sea in front of a harbor, Fort Vaux might claim the rank of a cruiser. More modern than Souville and Tavannes, which are caponnier forts, not so vast or so fully equipped as Douaumont, whose girdle contains a vast quantity of turrets, cupolas, casemates, barracks, and strongholds, it plants its leveled walls more firmly in the soil. Built of masonry about 1880, it was reconstructed in concrete after the invention of the torpedo-shaped shell, 1885, then in reinforced concrete, and was not finished till 1911. To the north of the main road from Verdun to Metz, via Étaingles, it mounts guard over the fortress, facing Thionville. At one end of a tableland which is framed by the Douaumont Range and the wooded knolls of La Lofay, and is sundered from them by narrow dales, it seems to emerge from the mouth of a river fringed with hills, to cleave with its prow the Wover plain. The Sea of Wover washes its northeastern slopes, these being at first precipitous and making dead ground. Then they change to a gentle gradient up to the ditch bordered by its transverse galleries. Two villages built along the bottom, Vaux devant Damloop in the north and Damloop in the south, escort it as merchantmen escort a great battleship. Accordingly, Vaux devant Damloop commands the entrance to a valley. This valley is the ravine of Le Basile, which a little farther on passes by a pool preceded by a dike, the Pool of Vaux. The road from Verdun to Vaux and the railway from Fleury to Vaux follow the course of this ravine. It receives as tributaries from the tableland on which the fort is situated the ravine of Les Fontaines, which cuts across the Vaux Chapitre forest in the direction of Souville, and from the Daumont range the ravines of La Cayette and La Fausse Côte, which pierce the forests of La Cayette and Hardaumont. These are the natural trenches, the routes of approach, which lead from one break in the ground to another. A soil so well wooded and so uneven is eminently suited to a war of surprises, of traps, of ambuscades, of bold strokes, of slow and treacherous penetration. It lends itself admirably to the ebb and flow of hand-grenade duels. The forests of La Cayette and Hardaumont, the ravines of La Cayette, of La Fausse Côte, of Le Basile, those dark, half-savage retreats where the summer holiday-maker once loved to lose himself, although now they have been drawn from their obscurity and are bathed in a blood-red splendor, the destiny of that fort whose advanced works they form is linked with their lot.
2. What the fort saw. Before February 21, 1916.
From the earliest days of that blazing month of August 1914, when the clash of nations began, Fort Vaux, plying with its questions the Woevre plain on the Thionville and Metz side, was awaiting on tenterhooks the results of the first collision. At night, it saw the long glittering arms of the Verdun searchlights rake the skies above its head, scanning the stars for zeppelins or taubes. Several regiments, marching past it, had taken up their station farther eastward in front of Jondelis or Conflans. The hours of waiting dragged on. It heard the firing of guns, but not from the quarter where it was keeping vigil. The sound was coming from Longwy, or perhaps from Longuyon. The storm, whirling along the Lorraine border, seemed to be swooping down upon the Ardennes. On August 20th and 21st, the fort saw troops defiling past it, with laughter and song on their lips. They were marching towards Longuyon by the Ornes road. They knew nothing as yet of the rigors of this new war. With light hearts they went to it, as lovers go to a trysting place. The Third Army, massed at Verdun, was making for Virton. On the 22nd, it had already come to grips with the Crown Prince's army. On the 25th, the garrison was cheered by a stroke of good fortune, of which it was at once informed. A German motor car, which was carrying the general staff orders, while running along the Étain road, went astray over the distances, and on the evening of the 24th came into our lines and was there captured. Our command, into whose hands the enemy's plans had so luckily fallen, gave orders for a surprise assault on the left flank of the 35th Division of the Landwehr and of the 16th Corps, which formed the left wing of the Crown Prince's army. The former, throwing down their rifles, fled as far as Saint-Privat, and the latter beat a hasty retreat to Bouviers. It is possible that this Étain fight, a little-known episode of the first battles, checkmated a rush attack upon Verdun. Nevertheless, it was necessary to give up the pursuit on the night of August 25th to 26th in order to remain in close coordination with the movements of the neighboring army and to pass along the left bank of the Meuse, leaving reserve divisions to guard the right bank on the line Orne-Fromzay-Hermeville. What Fort Vaux then saw go by at the foot of its slopes is a sight which those who witnessed it will never forget. In after years, they will tell it to their children and their children's children, that the memory may be kept green in each generation. Along the road from Étain to Verdun, seeking a haven of refuge in the old fortress which, more than once in the course of centuries, must have sheltered the inhabitants of the Meuse Valley against the onrush of Germanic hordes, came a hurried throng of two-wheeled and four-wheeled vehicles, of cyclists wheeling the machines which they had no room to mount, of wheelbarrows, of pushcarts, of pedestrians, of dogs, of cattle. Each took with him his most treasured possessions or what he had hastily snatched up in his house. On the carriages, many had piled mattresses, trunks, quilts, provisions, furniture, and on the top of all these were the old people, the sick, and the children. Yet these three classes could not always find room on the vehicles. Among those who trudged on foot were the blind and the halt, women carrying their babies, little ones with a doll or a birdcage in their hands. Some of them, their legs being shaky or not long enough, were too weary to drag themselves along. Behind these terror-stricken fugitives, the villages were in flames. They turned night into day over the whole countryside. Little by little, the fire drew nearer. Now it is Rouve that flares up, now Étain. A woman stops by the roadside and sits down. She has bared her breast to suckle a round, rosy baby which already has crisp curls and looks like those infant Jesuses of wax that are placed in mangers at Christmastide. Around her is a group of three youngsters. A soldier comes up and questions her. He is already well on in years, a territorial. The rapt look in his eyes as he gazes at the children is so tender that one feels he must have left a similar brood of his own at home. "Where do you come from, my poor woman?" "From Rouve. They have set fire to it." "How pretty they are." His they and hers are not the same, but his meaning is not lost on her. "One is missing," says the woman, and she begins to cry. "What has happened to it?" "They killed her. She was 8 years old. They fired on her as she was running in the street. This one also they tried to take from me. I pressed him to me hard enough to drive him into my flesh. One of them was going to plunge his bayonet into the poor mite, but one of his comrades turned it aside." The child has had its fill. The group goes on again. This is the new war, the war of frightfulness preached by Bernhardi. There was an epoch when truces were patched up for burying the dead and picking up the wounded. There was an epoch when a certain wartime chivalry held sway to protect the weak and the innocent. That period was the barbarous Middle Ages. But civilization and culture came into being, and we now have war, without pity, without quarter. One of the two opponents, tearing up the scraps of paper which regulate the treaties and the duties of nations, turning its plighted word into a sham and crushing the innocent and the weak, has compelled the other to put him into a strait waistcoat, as if he were a madman. It is a war that opens unbridgeable gulfs and leaves behind it indelible memories. It is a war of hell which demands the sanction of God. Fort Vaux, from its hilltop, saw all this. It felt that its own stones were less hard than the hearts of the men who had flooded the earth with this torrent of suffering. At last, the procession came to an end. The road now resembled one of those ancient riverbeds which leave a white track amid the pale foliage of the willows. The fort, on its lonely perch, was ruminating. "My turn will come. I bide my time. That mighty Douaumont that overlooks me, will it defend itself longer than I? It has a greater need of shells. As to Souville and Tavannes, if the enemy comes from the north, I am in front of them. I shall screen them." An important personage, no less than the governor of Verdun himself, came to examine its resources, to look into its physical and moral condition, to test its strength. "Are your eyes well guarded, and can they see far enough? Are your arms and your shields tough? Have you enough ammunition, food, drink? Do you know all your instructions, above all the one that is common to all the forts, to die rather than surrender?" With such questions as these, he visited the observing stations, the transverse galleries, the casemates, the turret, the armory, the provision stores, the cisterns, and inspected the garrison. He had already come once before at the beginning of August. This second visit foreboded an early attack. The enemy was not far off. He was known to be at Étain, at Billy-sous-Mangiennes, at Romagne-sous-les-Côtes, not in great masses, but in small detachments. From the north, he was passing above Verdun and turning off to the Argonne. Verdun, well defended, served the French army as a pivotal point for the immortal struggle of the Marne. One of the neutral historians of the war, Gottlob Egelhoff, quoted by Monsieur Hanotaux, has written, "If the crown princes of Bavaria and Prussia had been in a position to seize Verdun in August-September 1914, and accordingly to force the line of the Meuse, the German armies would have burst upon Paris at one fell swoop. The two princes, however, were held up at Verdun, and thus the German Supreme Command was forced to take the decision of leading back the right wing of their army. Verdun could not be captured, and for this reason it seemed essential to change the plan of campaign. A very lame explanation of our victory on the Marne, but one that at least emphasizes the importance of the part played by Verdun in September 1914. Fate decreed that Verdun should twice attract and twice wear out or shatter the German forces. Only by hearing the roar of the guns could Fort Vaux follow the battle fought on the left bank of the Meuse before Rambercourt-au-Post, Bauzet, La Vaud-Marie. From the roar of the guns, it could convince itself of the enemy's retreat, of his withdrawal to the north. Suddenly, however, on September 17th, it hears the guns farther to the south. The enemy hurls himself at Hattonchâtel and the Meuse Heights, bombards the Roman camp above Saint-Mihiel, fights in the barracks of Chauvancourt. He has not yet abandoned the quarry that he covets. After trying to invest Verdun on the left bank, he returns by way of the right bank, but the front is fixed at Spada, Le Morville, and Combres. It is fixed at 3.5 to 5 miles in front of Fort Vaux on the line Tressauveau-Boinville-Fromezay-Orne-Cours-Wood. On February 18, 1915, a red-letter day, the fort is pounded with 420mm shells. Douaumont has been favored with some on the 15th and 17th, and it was only right that Vaux should follow Douaumont. The fort examines its wounds and is happy. The engineers have worked well. Only my superstructure has suffered. My casemates are of good material. And it will rejoice exceedingly to learn next day that the range of that famous 420mm battery has been found, that it has been shelled in its turn and destroyed. The giants have been silenced, and that promptly. April and May were months of hope. Would they bring victory with the spring? The guns thundered daily at Marcheville and at Les Eparges, which had been gained. The Woevre was smoking as if weeds had been heaped up there for burning. Then the cannonade slackened off. Decidedly the war would be a long one against an enemy who stuck to our countryside like a leech. It needed patience, staying power, will, organization, munitions. All these would be forthcoming. So the troops got accustomed to war as well as to garrison life. The territorials billeted in the villages of Vaux and Damloop when they were off duty, played games of chance in the street, or used the cemetery as a place for sleeping. They helped the country folk in their haymaking. They looked for mushrooms or strawberries in the woods of Vaux-Chapitre and Hardemont, after first looking for lilies of the valley. In the trenches their life, so full of thrills the previous winter, glided along in a calm that was no doubt relative, but what is there that is not relative? And in monotony. On the summer evenings, on the escarp of the fort, the little garrison sat down with legs dangling and watched night rising from the Woevre plain. Now and then a distant rocket would end in a shower of stars. All this went on till one day, at the end of August 1915, the fort was sharply taken to task. You are not so important as you make out, or rather the whole land of France is as important as you. Did she not open out lines from one end of the country to another to shelter her defenders? It can no longer be denied that the enemy may be made to respect us at any point whatsoever of the national soil. Berry-au-Bac is an isolated salient on the right bank of the Aisne, and Berry-au-Bac has not yielded. It can no longer be denied that with artillery and determination one can capture any redoubt. Les Eparges formed a natural fortress, and we have taken Les Eparges. The fortified places have been unlucky during this war. They offer too easy a target for the big howitzers. Antwerp, Maubeuge, Warsaw, Lemberg, Przemysl surrendered with their war material, their magazines, their troops. Verdun will no longer be a fortified place. Verdun will offer no resources, no booty to the enemy. Verdun will be nothing but a pivotal point for an army. You will no longer be anything but a lookout post and a shelter. That may be, the fort admitted. In any case, I am only a soldier, and it is my business to obey. But my loins are strong. It will need much steel to crush them. You will see what I am capable of if ever I am attacked. The fort, now shrunken, became enveloped in the mists of winter. It heard less and less of the guns. Its diminished garrison grew bored in the almost deserted corridors. The news which came from the rear contained mysterious hints of a great Allied offensive which was slowly preparing and would develop when the time was ripe, perhaps not before the summer of 1916. England would methodically complete her gigantic new military machine, and Russia would need time to heal the wounds inflicted on her during the 1915 campaign. It is flattering, when one lives on the border of the Woevre, to have such distant and important friends, even if they need a certain amount of time for settling their affairs. In January and February 1916, the fort felt certain qualms. "I don't like being left so quiet as this. We know nothing here, but we have intuitions. Things are moving on the other side. Surely something is brewing." Things were moving indeed in the forest of Spincourt and in that of Mangens. Our aviators must have some inkling of it, for they make more and more frequent flights. But the soil is ill-fitted for observation, with its countless dips and its undergrowth. Even where there are no leaves, the brushwood defends itself against aerial photographers. Information comes that the railway of Spincourt, Muzeray, Billy-sous-Mangien, is working in unaccustomed fashion. It seems that the big caliber guns have been detrained. We are assured that new German corps have been brought into the district, among them the 3rd, which is returning from Serbia. Finally, the belfries of Rouves, Mangiens, Grimilly, Fomex, how had they been spared till then, were overthrown by the Germans. No doubt they might have served as guiding marks for our artillery. Whence come these vague rumors and these definite reports? There is no chance of finding out for certain. The soldiers who come back from Verdun bring them back and retail them. Silence is not a French virtue. There is uneasiness in the air. Yet the weather is so appalling, squalls of wind and snowstorms, that the attack seems unlikely, or at any rate postponed. Tomorrow, thinks the fort, which has faith in the strength of its walls, or the day after. On February 20th, the weather takes a turn for the better. On the 21st, at 7 o'clock in the morning, the first shell falls on Verdun, near the cathedral. The greatest battle of the greatest war is beginning.
This concludes today's reading of The Last Days of Fort Vaux by Henry Bordeaux. Join us also the day after tomorrow for the subsequent part. Subscribe to Major Antonio's channel. Thank you for listening, and so long.